This trough is designed to prevent erosion of canal banks by grazing herds of cattle and help wildlife and flora develop. Solar cattle troughs are used in the Netherlands, but the technology could not work in Britain, so an alternative had to be found. The solution was to design a system using a solar panel. This charges up a 12-volt battery which powers a pump, allowing water to flow into a tank. A ball valve monitors the water level, opening when it falls below the required level. The engineer who helped construct the system says it came about by combing existing technologies in a novel way. It's self-sustaining, it generates its own power, and it uses a local resource, canal water, and it protects the fringes. Because it's a low-cost, self-sustaining system, British Waterways hope to undertake similar projects at other sites across the UK. The aim is to prevent bank erosion from grazing cattle and protect endangered animals and plant species along the canal side. There's a mountain of information in cyberspace, and it's growing at an ever-increasing rate. So is the technology that's trying to hook tomorrow's web surfers. While Yahoo and MSM battle it out to try and topple the Goliath of search engines Google, at least one industry commentator is picking BlinkX as the next big thing. It's a thinking search engine sitting in the Windows application and looking for useful information while you work. Rather than relying on keywords typed into a search box, BlinkX automatically compiles suggestions based on the documents you read and write. BlinkX searches not only the internet, but also your desktop, the clutter of documents and emails on your own computer. You could be writing an email or writing a Word document or reading one, and what BlinkX will do is read that email or that Word document as well, and it will say, right, I understand what you're writing and reading, and I'm going to go out to the internet and I'm going to find other documents and other news sites that are similar to what is in your Word document. And I'm going to bring those to you so that if you're curious about this, you can just click on the button. There's still a conventional keyword search box, and BlinkX also has a visualizer, which shows graphically how a search is being conducted. Ideas can be dragged together to send the search in another direction. Feedback from users is helping to tweak the program before it goes live, but those who have tried it and liked it reckon that BlinkX is addictive. Its developers hope that will prove to be the case. A computer recreates the vast interior of the Great Exhibition of 1851. This high watermark of Victorian imperial self-confidence is one of the centerpieces of the World City Galleries. The years they span saw profound physical and social change in London as it grew into the first great metropolis of an empire ruling a quarter of the world's population. The world's first underground railway opened in London in 1863. Some of the earliest photographs ever made show the laying of underground tracks. While some enjoyed London's increasing wealth, a third of the population laboured in sweatshops, struggling to bring up families in the densely packed slum housing. The consequences are seen in this skeleton of a child. Its bent legs, a telltale sign of rickets, a disease of malnutrition. Probably the most important public health advance ever in London was the building of the sewers. This was triggered by the Great Stink of 1858, when even Parliament had to be suspended because the smell from the polluted Thames grew so bad. The exhibition carefully weaves together the complex political, social and technological threads that made London what it is today. Osteoporosis is a disease characterized by low bone mass and structural deterioration of bone tissue. It leads to increased bone fragility. 1 in 3 women are affected by the disease, but research at the University of Southampton shows that men are also at risk. Prevention is always better than cure, and a high intake of calcium can help ward off the disease. Through her research, Dr. Raphael of the University of Southampton hopes to raise men's awareness of the risk of osteoporosis.
You shouldn't smoke. This one will give you information on how you
A British invention is revolutionising sports coverage on television. Using unique ball tracking technology, Hawkeye can solve the most controversial sports decisions, from disputed line calls at tennis tournaments to LBW in cricket matches. Developed in the UK by Roke Manor Research and sports producers Sunset and Vine at a prototype cost of just £300,000, the system is now being used by sports broadcasters all over the world. Hawkeye uses cameras positioned around the ground which are used to track, say, the cricket ball. They are black and white high-speed cameras, so how it works is that each frame, the cricket ball is recognised in each of the cameras. Then combining the information from each of these cameras enables you to get a 3D trajectory of the ball. Once you have this trajectory, you can then predict the future path of the ball after it has hit the batsman. And that's when they are able to predict where the ball would have gone past the stumps, and therefore for cricket, prove whether the person was LBW or not. Hawkeye Innovations has its eye on the ball. The system is now used regularly in tennis and cricket coverage, and new applications will be used in a wider range of ball games. Scientists at the Cambridge University have been working on a program to allow those unable to use a keyboard access to writing in a computer. The Dasher text entry system has been trained to use the English language from books on the internet. On screen, the alphabet is shown, and users simply point the mouse to go to the first letter of the word they want and are navigated towards the correct spelling. Because this system learns as you input more words, it can be trained in different languages. They've already produced a Japanese version of the program. But for those unable to use a mouse, an eye tracker system has been developed. A camera records your eye movement, and this can then be used to select words on screen in the same way. It's thought the system will prove popular with disabled users. Dasher can also be used on handheld electronic personal organisers which don't have a keyboard. It's free to download from the internet and can be found by search using the word Dasher. Scientists hope that feedback from users will help improve and develop the system. These stunning outfits are made entirely from old clothes that people have donated to charity. NCAMS wants to educate people to recycle clothing and help the environment. They say there are over 900 million pieces of items of clothing thrown away each year, And it's important that we try and do something about that to reduce the waste that goes into landfill and tips all over the country. A number of celebrities have also donated clothing to the campaign, including British Prime Minister Tony Blair. The items provide much-needed clothing for the poor across the globe. Donation to the clothing banks means that recycled clothes can be used in places like Africa and India and the Baltic states. Thousands of recycling banks are located across the UK. Global warming is already having an effect in Mozambique. These were the floods that the people of Mozambique were praying wouldn't come. This time, at least 52 people died and more than 77,000 lost their homes. The Mozambique government had to appeal for international aid. Many countries sent aid and money, and the Red Cross, along with South African pilots who were involved in floods of previous years, evacuated people and provided them with shelter and medical treatment. The floods could not have come at a worse possible time for Mozambique. The country was struggling to rebuild itself after the devastation of earlier floods, which killed more than 700 people, destroyed roads, houses and crops across the southern and central parts of the country. Every athlete's dream is to perform to the best of their ability, but some may choose to illegally use performance-enhancing drugs to win. One area of concern is gene therapy. So far, they've identified 7 genes which help human performance. While work is being designed to help those with serious illness, it's feared it could be illegally used by athletes. Research in this area is still at an early stage. Matching the right genes to types of performance is still a long way off. But work in this field is going on elsewhere, and at some point could lead to the arrival of gene drugs, which would be very difficult to detect. For the vast majority of athletes, human performance depends on their own ability and genetic makeup. But for some, the desire to win and use such technological advances could lead to a growing number of gene drug abusers. It's not quite the Bionic Man, but this robot suit is being developed to help the disabled and elderly to walk. The system works by detecting faint electrical signals from the wearer's muscles to anticipate his or her movements. This triggers the motors at each joint to lend a hand. It has been designed and built by Professor Yoshiyuki Sankai and students at the University of Tsukuba. The team is still testing and refining the powered suit, codenamed HAL 3, or Hybrid Assistive Leg, which was inspired by a Japanese cartoon. HAL's brain, the motor drives, computer, wireless LAN, measurement systems and power supply fit into the backpack worn by the user, and there's a battery worn around the waist. There are 4 actuators, motor-powered devices attached around the knees and hip joints to drive the legs as the computer calculates the user's next motion. Speeds of up to 4 kilometers an hour can be reached with little physical exertion. The team is working on reducing the suit's size and weight, which is currently a hefty 23 kilograms. There are plans to produce the suit on a commercial basis. Space is at a premium in London's rapidly expanding docklands. In Trinity Buoy Wharf, though, an economical, environmentally friendly revolution in urban architecture is taking place. These artist studios, crafted out of old shipping containers, provide workshops and office space at a fraction of local prices. They're the beginnings of Container City, units of business accommodation with their own water supply, power and light, costing just €80 per square foot to rent, compared to normal local rates of €25 and upwards. Developers, Urban Space Management, are recycling a product of which there's an endless supply. Converting the containers is a straightforward job, with insulation the most crucial part of the process. The applications are endless. The converted containers can be adapted for use wherever cheap, versatile accommodation is needed. A local sixth form college has just started using 12 specially adapted containers as extra classrooms. The project cost €180,000, a fraction of the cost of a new building. Shipping containers are littered around docks all over the world. When converted, they can extend their life by some 50 to 60 years. Developed in the UK, Gleevec is giving new hope to sufferers of a deadly form of leukemia known as chronic myeloid leukemia, or CML. As well as producing remarkable results in trials, Gleevec helps CML patients live a normal life whilst undergoing treatment. The drug has none of the severe side effects associated with chemotherapy. Cancer experts say that Gleevec is producing some of the most exciting results they have ever seen. CML is linked to an abnormality known as the Philadelphia chromosome, created by an exchange of genetic material between two normal chromosomes. The fused gene produces a protein that triggers the abnormal white cell production in CML. Gleevec is a chemical which binds to a crucial part of the protein, blocking its ability to stimulate abnormal cell growth. It's the first of a new class of drugs that target the unique nature of a particular cancer cell. The success of Gleevec proves that drugs targeted as specific molecules can work. This gives hope to cancer researchers and sufferers everywhere. This tiny Stenocara beetle found in the searing Namib Desert of southwest Africa could have a profound effect on this. The beetle has the ability to collect water from wind-borne fogs. The pattern of its shell can be easily replicated and manufactured commercially. The answer lies in the shell. It's covered with bumps which attract water. Minute drops roll down the beetle's back into a brush-like structure around its mouth from which the beetle drinks. A highly efficient water collector which can be used around the world. The pattern can be repeated on tent fabrics for water collection in the desert, and the application for fog dispersal is both practical and efficient. It's yet another example of biomimetics, where scientists copy structures and mechanisms in living things, often with extraordinary results. Pickpockets have always been able to enjoy rich pickings on city streets, and women's handbags are often easy prey for thieves. But now, a British graduate has come up with a clever idea for how to make handbags that little less of a target. Louise Wilson has worked out how to design a fingerprint scanning device that protects a woman's personal possessions. As part of her final year studies at university, Louise designed a clear Perspex prototype of her handbag security idea. Here she demonstrates how the technology works. Fingerprint scanners record individual prints. Because the swirls and lines on each person's fingers are unique, the device only responds to fingerprints it recognizes in its memory. Louise has a model to show how discreet the unit would look if designed into a real bag. People like the idea because it is unique to the user. They like the fact that they can just use it themselves and the fact that it's just using fingerprint technology. Now what Louise needs is a company to take her innovation further and turn it into a product that one day we may see in shops. Louise's invention may soon be seen as the latest must-have accessory and be seen in chic central London boutiques like this. For most of the 20th century, these birds were very rare in the UK and Europe. But Matt Topsfield, a researcher at the University of Southampton, says their numbers are now on the rise. Egrets were once native to the UK about 200 years ago, but they were driven to extinction throughout the UK and Europe by hunting for their plumage. They've recently recolonised Europe and the UK. The cessation of hunting, legislative protection, and increased rice production across Europe have contributed to the increase in numbers. But one of the main factors affecting colonisation in the UK and Europe has been the weather. Severe winters in the 1970s prevented egrets from colonising in the UK. But warmer winters in the 1980s and 90s meant they could start breeding. Almost 1,000 egrets now roost in the UK, and up to 34,000 can be found across Europe. Around 40,000 cases of breast cancer are diagnosed in the UK each year. It is now the most common form of the disease in the country. If someone has the gene for breast and also bowel cancer, there's a good chance they'll pass it on to their offspring. The cancer gene is identified by first fertilizing an egg outside the womb. Once that has happened, a single cell is removed and tested for the breast or bowel cancer genes. Only the embryos without the cancer genes would be implanted in the mother's womb. Before the London-based doctors could go ahead, they need the permission of the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Authority. Opponents of the idea suggest it is getting away from the concept of curing disease and instead eliminating the person with the disease. If the HFEA approves the procedure though, it could become available very soon. This is the first time we can see what's inside an Egyptian mummy without unwrapping it. New technology gives us a virtual body, and it unveils secrets not revealed before. This mummy of a high priest who lived in 800 BC is pioneering the virtual unwrapping technology. The technique reveals every detail of his face and body. And pupils from a school in London were the first to see it. As well as putting a face to this 3,000-year-old priest, the technology also tells us a lot about the world in which he lived. Historians hope this new project will not only give visitors the ultimate 3D experience, but also increase our understanding of this ancient civilization. These aircraft, both model and full size, were all part of a NASA research program to learn more about wake vortices, or tornado-like patterns of air that trail behind the wings of airplanes. The sheer energy of these vortices, or wind turbulence, left in the wake of larger aircraft has the ability to completely invert lighter aircraft that may be following. This is especially dangerous as craft approach for landing and has resulted in several aircraft crashes. While all aircraft cause vortices, large and heavy jets such as the 747 and DC-10 can create much more serious problems. These problems are made worse as air traffic increases at airports. Smoke generators mounted on the wings of the planes made it possible to see and investigate the whirling air patterns. This research showed that by adjusting wing flaps at different angles and by making various design changes, the intensity of the vortices could be substantially reduced. But this wasn't the only research NASA was conducting. For 60 years, NASA has pioneered aeronautical research. During World War II, the need was for real-time problem solving to respond to various crises. More recently, however, research was aimed at making planes fly higher, faster, farther, quieter, and with greater safety. It was little wonder then that research into the problem of wake vortices should be taken up with such enthusiasm. Research ranged from studies where different combinations of gear and flaps were used to break up the vortex, to an experimental laser system at the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. Working with the Federal Aviation Authority, the experimental laser program was an effort to develop an accurate vortex detection and monitoring system that would permit tracking the path of vortices produced by large aircraft. Field tested at the John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York, the laser research was mainly aimed at making commercial aircraft safer. Information gained by flights of the 3,500 km/h YF-12 helped the designers of new aircraft as well. The rocket-powered craft completed 36 missions over the desert near the Flight Research Center, which brought to a close experimental rocket-powered flight tests that began with the XS-1 in 1946. These unique planes proved extremely valuable in advanced aeronautical research. And that's not all the engineering teams do. Using the same aeronautical knowledge harnessed to design high-speed jet aircrafts, NASA engineers designed and tested a variety of fuel-saving modifications for large trucks. Even some simple changes resulted in a 40% reduction in aerodynamic drag. This translated directly into a highway cruise fuel reduction of 20 to 25%. As part of the NASA program of air safety, engineers needed to also examine the crashworthiness of light aircraft. These tests at NASA's Langley Research Center were at least in part driven by the need to try and understand the forces involved in accidents. The aim is to reduce the number of injuries and fatalities that occur in light aircraft accidents. Another important element in reducing aerial fatalities was the education of pilots. And instrumental in that has been the flight simulator for advanced aircraft. What the pilot sees and hears in this simulator at the Ames Research Center is just like the real thing. NASA is continuing to push for safer and more efficient use of our airways. Alicia Sands just got engaged and wants to avoid getting her period during the honeymoon. So she's come to talk to Dr. Ricky Friedman at Mount Sinai Medical Center in New York about how to take birth control pills to time her menstruation. Birth control pills are a combination of hormones that prevent a woman from ovulating. Dr. Friedman says women on birth control pills do not even need to have a period. Sands is not alone in her desire to have more control over her menstruation. In fact, most women would choose to get their period less frequently or not at all, according to results of a recent study. But Dr. Alan Wachowski of Beth Israel Medical Center says there are benefits to menstruating. Frivolously avoiding a period can produce problems. It depletes women of their natural B vitamins, folic acid, B6, B12 and zinc, minerals and vitamins that are important for hormone balancing. But Dr. Friedman says it is perfectly healthy to take the hormones without a placebo break. Sam O'Leary has come to have a special 3D scan of her second child. She's 14 weeks pregnant. Her daughter Harriet only has one kidney, and Sam wants to check that everything is okay with baby number 2. It looks as though Sam's baby is dancing. This movement so early in pregnancy has surprised obstetricians. Professor Stuart Campbell, who pioneered this scan, says they've been able to see a much more complex range of fetal behaviour and at a much more complex stage than they realised. These groundbreaking scans have already shown unborn babies at 26 weeks blinking, yawning and even smiling, generating debate as to whether they are showing emotion in the womb or simply muscle reflex. Medical experts say scans such as these show that there is still much to be learnt about fetal development. Professor Campbell says these developments need to be documented and more research carried out. But there is no doubt anti-abortionists will use the information as further evidence against the case for terminations being carried out as late as 24 weeks. Unloaded from the back of a truck and ready for liftoff in about 24 hours, the Techsphere Spherical Airship 62, or AS-62, can go and do what blimps up until now have only dreamed of. In this age of laser-guided weaponry and real-time satellite communications, it's difficult to imagine any interest in supplying the US defence arsenal with fat, lumbering blimps. But backers say the AS-62 is cheaper than satellites and manned reconnaissance planes and would fill a gap between the two. While a satellite can cost the government about $150 million, airship developers say their craft would cost only a few million and could be useful to a vast array of purchasers. As the sun came up, the ropes went up and the airship's two side-mounted propeller motors kicked into action. Combined with the lift from the compressed helium contained in the huge white bubble, up it went. It drifted quickly to an altitude of about 400 feet. Then the two pilots demonstrated the agility which make this airship different from the rest. The interest for the government, particularly the military, who are anxious to have more ground surveillance capabilities, is the AS-62's unique ability to hover over a particular area for long periods of time, more efficient than fixed-winged drones that must do flyovers. The New Age blimp can be outfitted with an almost endless array of monitoring and detection devices, and is nearly undetectable from ground radar. After reaching an altitude of 10,000 feet, where the airship was invisible to the naked eye and way out of earshot, the two-man crew began their descent. Landing the craft with about 400 pounds less fuel aboard than had been done before, it looked somewhat like a beach ball bouncing off the ground as four people tried to cling to an anchor cable. But the test flight was a success, and soon the US military may be flying one of these over war zones.
Sally Sykes began to experience blurred vision that was wavy and distorted. Her ophthalmologist said her eyes were fine, but she might have another more serious problem. Sykes' neurologist said her vision disturbances were a result of something more serious, a brain aneurysm. Rather than having open brain surgery, she underwent a less invasive method to contain the aneurysm. Beginning in an artery in Sykes' groin, neuroradiologists threaded a platinum coil through a catheter up to her brain to the aneurysm site. Dr. Michael Maywood of Baylor College of Medicine says once the coil is inserted into the aneurysm, it stops the blood flow into the area. The platinum is designed to create scar and connective tissue at the site. As collagen and scar tissue builds up, the healing process is accelerated and reinforced. The long-term follow-up and long-term results of the endovascular treatment of aneurysm will be better, especially in those wide-necked aneurysms that have a better chance of recurring and coming back. Maywood says many aneurysms like Sykes' are too risky to repair through conventional surgery because of the size and location.
It was once a threat faced only by the military, a ground-to-air missile attack on an aircraft. But today's world passenger planes are as much a target as fighter jets. Now a missile defense system that has been used on Israeli military aircraft for more than a decade is allegedly being trialled on some of the national airline El Al's passenger planes. The Flight Guard system uses computerized radar to help the pilot decide when to launch flares to divert heat-seeking missiles. The missiles, attracted to the new heat source, are diverted from their original route and instead target the flares. The system is meant to prevent attacks like the one launched against an Israeli Arkia charter jet over Kenya in November 2002. Two shoulder-launched missiles were fired at the jet. They missed because the weapons were inaccurate. According to Elta, the company behind Flight Guard, the system has been used by Israeli military aircraft for years. ELTA say the system, which costs $750,000 US per unit, is now being used on aircraft in Europe, the Far East and the Persian Gulf. It's like a cassette of flares. They have 4 similar cassettes installed around the aircraft, 2 from the left side, 2 from the right side. Each cassette contains 15 flares, making 60 flares altogether. In some cases, FlightGuard has been installed on aircraft used by national leaders, but ELTA said it had no knowledge of FlightGuard being used on board civilian airlines. The things you can do with mobile phones. You can talk on them, of course. Some people seem to do little else. You can play games on them. You can send messages. You can even take photographs and send them to people across the world. So what else could you possibly want to do with a mobile phone? Norwegian broadcaster NRK thinks it knows. It has just opened a service offering 24-hour television broadcasting to anyone in Norway. All you need is a mobile phone equipped with video support and you're ready to watch. Just dial the station's number. Now, is this the start of a world trend? Would people in, say, London watch television on their mobile phones? It could happen during sporting events like Wimbledon. And remember, what happens to mobile phones in Scandinavia tends to end up all over the world. For many, the worst part of aging is giving up independent living. That's why engineers at the University of Virginia are developing a discreet and affordable method to turn the homes of the elderly into smart houses that can alert caregivers of emergencies, lifestyle changes and health concerns. 72-year-old Roberta Allen is happy to have her daily movements monitored. Dr. Robin Felder is designing the Smart House network to be as unobtrusive as possible. The base system is a simple set of motion detectors that transmit the inhabitant's household movement to concerned family members or physicians, who can better assess quality of life questions, knowing how much time is spent in bed or how many trips to the refrigerator is the norm. A more sophisticated version will one day collect health-related data. Floor sensors will detect erratic walking patterns and take blood pressure readings through the soles of the feet, while the toilet can gather everything from glucose levels to kidney abnormalities. Today, the safety record of light aircraft is at its peak, but it hasn't always been that way. In the late 1980s, hundreds of small plane crashes accounted for thousands of fatalities annually. At the time, there was no method of predicting the behavior of general aviation airplanes when they crashed. So in a joint project with America's Federal Aviation Authority, NASA began a light aircraft crash safety program at the Langley Research Center in Virginia. This was one of 20 flood-damaged planes that was to be tested. The actual facility was originally used by Apollo astronauts to practice landing on the moon. The 80-metre high by 130-metre long lunar landing practice area was laced with cables that were attached to the highly instrumented aircraft before it would come crashing to the ground. Engineers hope to learn what happens to an airframe structure when it impacts, and to develop an analytical design tool that could be turned over to the designers and builders of general aviation planes. For this first checkout test, the plane was complete except for the tail section and engines. Comparable weights took the place of missing parts, and the fuel tanks were filled with water for weight and balance. The first crash was made at an impact speed of 50 kilometers per hour, and future drops were at speeds of up to 100 kilometers per hour. Here you can see some of the resulting damage, most of which was confined to the nose and underside of the aircraft. The proposition at the time was that the tests would lead to the integration of energy absorption concepts into airframe design, and that is exactly what happened. And planes weren't the only things they were dropping on purpose at the Langley Research Centre. In this case, it was a 1.2-ton Army helicopter. The CH-47 helicopter had earlier been damaged by fire in the plant where it was manufactured, making it a good candidate for the crashworthiness test. Watch again, this time in slow motion, as the helicopter was dropped 20 metres to the concrete below. The highly instrumented craft was being used in a cooperative experiment with the US Army to improve design and safety features of future helicopters. These tests have improved aircraft design and ultimately saved many thousands of lives. At present, breast cancer detection can be a painful procedure, and waiting for results can take weeks. But researchers at this university believe they can improve upon the situation and also potentially avoid costly and time-consuming laboratory testing. They're developing a highly sensitive ultraviolet light to examine tissue. The information gathered reveals a spectrum of colour that separates healthy and cancerous tissue, and the results show whether the light has hit healthy or abnormal cells long before any damage becomes visible to the eye. Before now, no one had really devised a system delicate enough to detect the difference without bombarding the patient with high-powered levels of laser light. The researchers have already linked up with 2 UK industrial companies to get their light systems ready for manufacture. Reading University is a leading centre for botanical research, holding rare plant specimens from around the world. This collection of over 250,000 dried samples of plants and herbs, some centuries old, are stored in the university's herbarium. This rich storehouse of botanical data is now being put on the internet. This new species of lavender was discovered in Morocco by researchers from Reading and the University of Rabat. It's the latest plant to be added to the growing online botanical database at Reading. This computerised plant library is helping Dr. Jury and his Moroccan colleagues build up a complete atlas of that country's flora. Botanists in other research centres are increasingly making use of this unique resource. As well as dried specimens, drawings and sketches by professional and amateur botanists are loaded onto the database. They too are a valuable source of information on the location of different plant species around the world. For researchers anywhere in the world wanting help in identifying plants or charting the changing growth patterns of species, the online herbarium at Reading is proving an indispensable scientific tool.